The room that changed the conversation. What if I told you that one Senate hearing, one exchange between two people, cracked open a question that most politicians are too afraid to even whisper out loud? Because that's exactly what happened. It didn't start dramatically. No shouting, no breaking news alerts, no viral moment in the first 60 seconds. Senator John Kennedy walked into that hearing room the way he always does. Calm, measured, almost casual. Pam Bondi was seated across from him, composed, ready for the standard back and forth that Washington runs.
That legitimacy is important to the Department of Justice, which in part administers our criminal justice system?
Yes, Senator.
And if Americans come to believe that our criminal justice system or our Department of Justice is acting illegitimately, that makes Americans less likely to accept the results of that system, does it not?
Yes, Senator.
And that makes Americans less likely to follow the substantive laws that we pass that are administered by the Department of Justice. Isn't that true?
Yes, Senator.
And if that happens, we have chaos, don't we?
Chaos.
And the social contract is breached, isn't it?
Yes.
Do you remember a person by the name of Michael Avenatti?
Yes.
Several years ago, he was a media star here in Washington.
An attorney, correct?
Yes. He was a media star. And many members of our media loved him because he persistently bashed Donald Trump. And he was on TV every day. He was on CNN more than Wolf Blitzer. Do you know where Mr. Avenatti is today?
I believe he's sitting in prison, Senator.
He's in jail because he was a crook. And the Department of Justice helped put him there, didn't it?
Yes, Senator.
Do you remember a gentleman by the name of Sam Bankman-Fried?
Yes, Senator.
Boy genius. So smart and so powerful that he thought he could command the tides. So smart and so powerful and so rich that he would go to meetings with serious people like Bill Clinton, like Tony Blair, looking like a slob, looking like a fourth runner-up to a John Belushi lookalike contest. And he thought it was cute. Where's Mr. Bankman-Fried today?
I believe he is in prison, and I believe that's from the Netflix series I saw as well.
Mm-hmm. Because he's a crook. And who helped put him there?
The Department of Justice, Senator.
Can we agree that there's some really, really good men and women at the Department of Justice?
Many, many great men and women in the Justice Department, as well, Senator, as all the law enforcement agencies that fall within the Department of Justice. They're out there risking their lives, especially the law enforcement officers, every single day.
Can we agree, though, that there have been and may be today some bad people at the Department of Justice?
Yes, Senator.
We don't know for sure because for the last 4 years, the curtains there have been tightly drawn. But I think a minority of people there had delegitimized America's criminal justice system. The most destabilizing act that I saw in the past 4 years, maybe in the history of the department, is when Attorney General Garland decided on the basis of dubious facts and untested legal theories to criminally prosecute a former president of the United States. And not only that, this is the special part. He decided to do it after the former president of the United States had announced that he was going to run against Attorney General Garland's boss, didn't he?
Senator, are you referring to going after a political opponent?
I think so. Now, this is one person's opinion. That kind of stupid takes a plan. And I say that because, number one, this is America. That had never happened before in America. That's the sort of thing that happens in a country whose Powerball jackpot is 287 chickens and a goat. It doesn't happen here. And I call it stupid because it broke the seal. It broke the seal. It normalized it. There are a lot of ambitious prosecutors in America, Democrat and Republican. And I'll bet you right now there's some prosecutor in a particular state thinking about, well, maybe I ought to file criminal charges against President Biden's inner circle for conspiring to conceal his mental decline. And that's the road we're headed down. And you've got to fix it, Counselor. You've got to fix it. And here's, in my judgment, what I would ask you to do. Find out who the bad guys are and the bad women and get rid of them. Find out who the good people are and lift them up. But do it on the basis
on. But Kennedy wasn't there for standard. He leaned forward, and instead of jumping straight into policy disputes or legal technicalities, he asked something far more fundamental. He asked about legitimacy, and that one word, that single concept, turned a routine Senate hearing into one of the most revealing conversations about American justice we've seen in years. Here's where it gets interesting. Kennedy asked Bondi directly, "Does legitimacy matter to the Department of Justice?" She said yes. "Does it matter to America's criminal justice system as a whole?" Yes again. And then Kennedy started connecting the dots one by one in a way that was impossible to ignore. His argument was this: when people believe in the system, when ordinary Americans look at the courts, at federal prosecutors, at the DOJ, and think, okay, this is fair, this is real, that belief is what holds everything together. It's not the laws written on paper. It's not the courtrooms or the badges or the gavels. It's trust. Pure, fragile, human trust. And trust, once broken, doesn't just bend, it shatters. Kennedy laid it out like a slow-moving domino effect. First, people start doubting individual verdicts. Then they begin questioning entire investigations. Then, and this is the part that should make every American pause, they stop feeling obligated to follow the very laws those institutions are supposed to enforce. Kennedy called it what it is: chaos, a breach of the social contract itself. The room got quiet, and it got quiet for a reason. Because this wasn't partisan noise. This wasn't a senator grandstanding for a campaign clip. This was someone asking out loud whether America is still the country it believes itself to be. Do you think that question is getting asked enough in Washington? Let me know in the comments. Now, Kennedy didn't just throw abstract philosophy at B9 and walk away. He came prepared. He came with names, real names, names that every American has heard, names attached to real rises and real collapses. And the first name he dropped? Michael Avenatti. You remember Avenatti. For a stretch of time, you couldn't turn on cable news without seeing his face. CNN, MSNBC. The man was everywhere. Sharp suit, sharper quotes, always ready with a line that would make headlines by morning. He positioned himself as one of the loudest legal voices against Donald Trump, and the media loved him for it. Some corners of the internet were genuinely floating his name as a future presidential candidate. Here's what Kennedy said about him. Avenatti was on CNN more than Wolf Blitzer. That's not an insult. That's just a fact about how thoroughly this man had embedded himself into the national conversation. But Kennedy's point wasn't about media fame. It was about what came after the fame. Because while Avenatti was building his television career, something else was building behind the scenes. Federal investigators were looking closely at his financial dealings, accusations tied to fraud, extortion, and what prosecutors described as the misuse of his own clients' money, the same clients he was supposedly fighting for. The fall was fast and it was hard. After multiple investigations and trials, Avenatti ended up exactly where Kennedy described, sitting in a prison cell. And Kennedy's message was sharp. The Department of Justice put him there. Not politics, not ratings, evidence. That's what a functioning justice system looks like. It doesn't care how many television appearances you've made. Part 2. The billionaire who thought he was untouchable. Some people collect power like it's a hobby. Private jets, political connections, billion-dollar handshakes, and somewhere along the way, they start believing the rules were written for everyone else. Sam Bankman-Fried was that person. Kennedy brought up the name almost casually, but the second he said it, every person in that hearing room knew exactly who he was talking about. Because the Sam Bankman-Fried story isn't just a financial scandal. It's a masterclass in how quickly an empire built on illusion can come crashing down. Here's where it gets interesting. For a while, Bankman-Fried, or SBF, as the financial world called him, was treated less like a businessman and more like a prophet. His cryptocurrency exchange, FTX, was growing at a speed that made traditional Wall Street veterans genuinely nervous. His personal fortune ballooned into the billions almost overnight, and instead of buying a yacht and disappearing, he leaned into the spotlight. He became a political mega donor. He showed up at high-level conferences talking about the future of money, the future of technology, the future of everything. Photographs circulated of him sitting in rooms with Bill Clinton, with Tony Blair, global figures who don't exactly take meetings with nobodies. And yet, and Kennedy made sure to highlight this, he showed up to all of it looking, in Kennedy's words, like a fourth runner-up to a John Belushi lookalike contest. The rumpled hair, the wrinkled shorts, the deliberate "I'm too smart to care about appearances" energy. It was calculated. It was a costume. And for a long time, the world bought it. But behind the polished PR machine and the celebrity photos, analysts were already starting to whisper. Questions were surfacing about how FTX was actually managing customer funds. Some insiders raised red flags early. Flags that, in hindsight, were screaming warnings dressed up as minor concerns. Then the bottom fell out. Almost overnight, reports emerged that billions, not millions, billions in customer funds had effectively vanished. People who had trusted FTX with their savings, their investments, their financial futures, woke up one morning to find it gone. The cryptocurrency market went into shock. Regulatory bodies scrambled, and federal prosecutors started asking questions that Bankman-Fried had no clean answers to. The trial that followed was one of the most closely watched financial cases in recent American history. Prosecutors laid out what they described as a deliberate, calculated fraud. Not a mistake, not bad luck, but a scheme. Bankman-Fried was convicted on multiple counts and sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Kennedy's point? Delivered with the kind of dry precision he's known for? That's what the Department of Justice is capable of when it's working the way it should. Billionaires fall. Media darlings fall. Political connections don't build walls around you when federal prosecutors have evidence, and Bondi, to her credit, didn't flinch from that. She acknowledged it directly. The department has put genuinely powerful, genuinely dangerous people behind bars. There are thousands of men and women inside the DOJ working cases that never make headlines, building prosecutions that protect ordinary Americans from fraud, violence, and financial predators every single day. Kennedy gave them their credit. He said it clearly. There are great people in that building. Dedicated professionals who risk their careers, sometimes their lives, to uphold the law. But And this is where Kennedy's tone shifted in a way the room couldn't ignore. He said even a minority of bad actors inside a powerful institution can poison the well for everyone else. You don't need corruption to be widespread for it to be destructive. You just need enough people making enough questionable decisions for the public to start asking, wait, can I actually trust this? And once that question takes root, it spreads. Every future prosecution gets viewed through a lens of suspicion. Every indictment becomes a political football. Every conviction gets questioned, not on the merits, but on the motive. That's not a justice system anymore. That's a battlefield dressed up in legal language. Do you think the DOJ has fully earned back public trust, or is that damage already done? Let me know in the comments. Because Kennedy was building towards something much bigger than Avenatti or Bankman-Fried. He was building toward a name and a decision that he called perhaps the most destabilizing act in the modern history of the Department of Justice. And that's exactly where things get complicated. There are moments in history that don't announce themselves as turning points. They arrive quietly, dressed up in legal language in press conferences, and only later, sometimes much later, does the full weight of what just happened become clear. Kennedy believes America is living through one of those moments right now, and he didn't mince words about it. He called it, and I want you to hear this carefully, the most destabilizing act he had seen in the past 4 years, maybe in the history of the department. That's not a throwaway line from a senator looking for a soundbite. That's a deliberate, calculated statement from someone who has spent decades watching how Washington operates. And what he was describing was the criminal prosecution of a former president of the United States, Donald Trump, under Attorney General Merrick Garland. Here's where it gets interesting. Now, before we go further, this is genuinely contested territory. Reasonable, intelligent people land on completely opposite sides of this debate. So let's lay out both arguments honestly, because this story deserves more than a bumper sticker. The case for prosecution is straightforward and, to many legal scholars, compelling. The rule of law means exactly what it says. No one is above it. Not celebrities, not billionaires, and not former presidents. If evidence of wrongdoing exists, the argument goes, then failing to prosecute is itself a form of corruption. It sends a message that power buys immunity, that the higher you climb, the further beyond consequences you travel. Supporters of the prosecutions argue that Garland didn't have a choice, that looking the other way would have been the real betrayal of American justice. That's one side, and it's not a weak side. But Kennedy's concern, and this is what made the room go quiet, isn't really about whether Trump specifically should or shouldn't have been prosecuted. His concern is about what comes next. He called it breaking the seal. Think about what that means. For over 200 years of American history, no sitting administration had ever criminally prosecuted a former president who was actively running for office against the current administration's party. Never, not once. Whatever you think of the individuals involved, that boundary held. And Kennedy's argument is this. Once you cross that line, you can't uncross it. Because here's the reality of American politics that Kennedy spelled out with uncomfortable clarity. There are ambitious prosecutors in every state in this country. Democrat and Republican. Some of them are brilliant, some of them are politically motivated, some of them are both. And right now, Kennedy suggested, some of those prosecutors are sitting in their offices looking at what happened and thinking, well, if that's on the table now. He went further. He floated a specific hypothetical, and it's one that should make people on both sides of the political aisle uncomfortable. What stops a prosecutor somewhere from filing criminal charges against President Biden's inner circle, arguing they conspired to conceal his mental decline from the American public? You might think that's far-fetched. You might think the legal standards would prevent it. But Kennedy's point is that those same legal standards were supposed to prevent what already happened, and they didn't. That's the trap. That's the road he's warning about. Once retaliation becomes normalized, once the justice system becomes the weapon of choice in political warfare, the cycle doesn't stop. One investigation triggers another. One prosecution justifies the next, and slowly, steadily, the institution that was supposed to stand above politics becomes completely consumed by it. Some analysts push back on this. They argue that professional prosecutors are bound by strict evidentiary standards, that politically motivated cases fall apart in court, that the system has enough checks built in to prevent a full-scale collapse into partisan legal warfare. Maybe, but Kennedy's response to that optimism is essentially, We've already seen what happens when those guardrails are tested, and the results weren't reassuring. Here's what I find most striking about this entire exchange. Kennedy wasn't letting the current administration off the hook either. He wasn't sitting there saying our side is clean. He was saying the entire institution is damaged, and someone has to actually fix it. Not with speeches, not with press releases, with accountability. Find the bad actors, he told Bondi. Get rid of them. Find the good ones and lift them up. But do it on the basis of evidence. Not political pressure, not public outrage, not whoever is trending on social media that week. Is that even possible in today's political climate? That's the question hanging over everything Kennedy said. Do you think the seal can ever truly be repaired? Or has American justice changed permanently? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Because what Kennedy was really arguing, underneath all the case studies and the historical references, is that institutions don't survive on laws alone. They survive on belief. And right now, that belief is under serious strain. Which brings us to the final, most uncomfortable question of all. Let me ask you something that most people in Washington are too careful to say out loud. What happens to a country when its citizens stop believing in the institutions designed to protect them? Not theoretically, not in a political science textbook, actually, in real life, in grocery stores and town halls and family dinner tables across America? What happens when the average person looks at the Department of Justice and thinks, I don't know if that place is working for me anymore? That's not a hypothetical question. That's the conversation Kennedy forced into the open during that hearing, and the answer, wherever you land politically, should concern every single American. Here's where it gets interesting. Kennedy ended his questioning by turning directly to Bondi with something that felt less like a political demand and more like a genuine plea. He told her, you have to fix this, not as a talking point, not as a campaign promise, as an actual, urgent institutional necessity. His instructions were almost surgical in their simplicity. Find the people inside the DOJ who have damaged its credibility. Remove them. Find the people who have upheld it with integrity under enormous pressure. Elevate them, and do all of it strictly on the basis of evidence. Not politics, not loyalty, not which cable news network is currently praising or attacking the department. Sounds straightforward, right? Except nothing about this is straightforward anymore. Because here's the reality that Kennedy's entire argument was quietly pointing toward. The damage isn't just inside the Department of Justice. The damage is in perception. And perception, once it shifts in the minds of millions of people, doesn't get corrected by a single Senate hearing, or a new Attorney General, or even a string of high-profile convictions, trust is rebuilt slowly. It's destroyed fast. And right now, Americans across the political spectrum, for very different reasons, from very different directions, are looking at federal institutions with a level of skepticism that would have seemed extreme just 15 years ago. Conservatives feel the system was weaponized against their political leaders. Progressives worry that power and money still buy quiet exits from consequences. Neither side feels like the scales are perfectly balanced. Both of those feelings can be simultaneously real. That's what makes this moment so genuinely difficult. Here's my take on it, and I want to be direct with you. Kennedy's warning about broken seals and prosecutorial cycles isn't just political theater. History actually supports his concern. Countries that allow their legal systems to become extensions of political power, regardless of which party is holding that power, don't recover easily. The line between justice and political warfare, once blurred, has a way of staying blurry. And the collateral damage isn't paid by politicians or prosecutors. It's paid by ordinary citizens who lose faith in the one system that's supposed to protect them equally. At the same time, and this matters, the argument that powerful people must face consequences regardless of their status is not wrong either. A justice system that protects its most powerful figures from accountability isn't a justice system. It's a hierarchy with legal language painted over it. So where does that leave us? Somewhere uncomfortable. Somewhere that requires nuance that our current political conversation is genuinely terrible at producing. What needs to happen, in my honest assessment, is something that almost never occurs in Washington. Both sides need to simultaneously accept two things that feel contradictory but aren't. First, accountability must be real, consistent, and evidence-based regardless of political affiliation. Second, the process of accountability must be visibly, demonstrably free from political motivation. Because a conviction that the public doesn't believe in doesn't strengthen the rule of law. It weakens it. Pam Bondi now sits at the head of an institution carrying years of accumulated suspicion from multiple directions. The question isn't whether she says the right things in Senate hearings. The question is whether the decisions made inside that building over the next few years actually reflect a return to the kind of impartial, evidence-driven justice that Kennedy was describing. That's what will rebuild the seal. Not speeches, not symbolism, but consistent, transparent, politically fearless decision-making over time. And frankly, given how polarized this country currently is, given how thoroughly politics has seeped into every institution, every conversation, every headline, that is an extraordinarily difficult thing to ask of any individual or any administration, but it's the only thing that actually works. Because Kennedy was right about the core of his argument, whenever you think of the specific political figures involved, legitimacy isn't decoration, it isn't a talking point. It is the foundation. Without it, the most powerful justice system in the world becomes just another arena where power fights power, and ordinary people pay the price. The hearing ended. The cameras packed up. Washington moved on to the next story, the next controversy, the next cycle. But the question Kennedy raised didn't leave the room with the senators. It's still out there, still unanswered, still growing. Can America's justice system find its way back to something that every citizen, regardless of who they voted for, can look at and say, yes, that's fair. Yes, I trust that. Do you think that's still possible? Or has the damage already gone too far? Let me know in the comments. Because this is exactly the kind of conversation that Washington hopes you're too tired to have. The most dangerous thing in a democracy isn't a corrupt politician. It's a population that stopped believing the system can be fixed.